The setting sun barely managed to penetrate the dusty curtains of Dorothy Miller's office, where she sat surrounded by piles of invoices and accounting records spread across her old wooden desk. Each sheet was a reminder of better times, when her husband was still alive and the business thrived under his careful management. Now, with a calculator in one hand and a pen in the other, Dorothy realized the numbers simply didn't add up. With a heavy sigh, she leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "This isn't right," she murmured to herself, scanning the sales records from the past month. "The sales are good. But the money? Where is the money?" The office door opened gently and Jessica entered, carrying a tray with a kettle and 2 cups. "Mom, you're working too hard," she said, placing the tray on the desk and pouring the tea. "You need to rest a bit." Dorothy forced a fragile smile as she accepted the cup of tea from her daughter's hands. "Rest won't balance these numbers, Jessie." Jessica sat down across from Dorothy, crossing her legs elegantly. "Mom, I've told you, everything is under control. Expenses were a bit higher this month. Some renovations, remember?" "Renovations that I didn't authorize," Dorothy responded, irritation beginning to show in her voice. "And these expenses with suppliers? They're almost double what they used to be." Jessica stirred her tea, avoiding her mother's gaze. "We had to switch suppliers, remember? Prices went up. It's just a phase, it will stabilize soon." Dorothy placed her cup on the table with a bit more force than intended. "Jessie, I've been running this business for over 30 years. I know when something isn't right. I'm not accusing you of anything, I just want to understand." Sensing the concern in her mother's face, Jessica held Dorothy's hands. "Mom, I promise, I'm taking care of everything. Maybe it's time to consider retirement, you know? Leave the worries to the younger ones." Dorothy withdrew her hands, her gaze hardening. "This business is everything your father and I built. I won't just hand it over because the numbers are confusing. I'm going to get to the bottom of this." Jessica sighed, standing up. "Well, if you change your mind, I'm here to help." She walked to the door, but before leaving, she turned briefly. "Try not to stress too much, Mom. I'll check everything again tomorrow, okay?" As soon as the door closed, Dorothy picked up the records again, her eyes sweeping over the lines of numbers. She knew something was wrong, something that went beyond simple accounting errors. "Something is going on here, and I'm going to find out what," she murmured to herself, determined. With that firm resolution in mind, Dorothy decided it was time to seek external help. She needed a fresh perspective, perhaps someone who could look at the books without the emotional involvement her family brought. Rising, she walked to the window, looking out at the house next door, where Christopher lived, a neighbor who had been a friend of her husband and knew a bit about accounting. "Maybe Chris can shed some light on this," she thought, feeling a glimmer of hope. Without wasting another minute, Dorothy picked up the phone and dialed Christopher's number, beginning the next step in her journey to uncover the truth. As the phone rang, she felt a mix of nervousness and determination. A new chapter was beginning, and she was ready to face whatever came next. With a mug of coffee in hand, Christopher paused in front of the window that overlooked the quiet street lined with ancient oaks. The late afternoon light cast long shadows on the asphalt, and he watched Dorothy's house, located directly across the street. For months, he had noticed a disturbing pattern. Dorothy's children visited the house with almost mechanical regularity, always leaving with envelopes that seemed too bulky to be mere casual correspondence. That day was no different. Brian arrived in his shiny new car, a stark contrast to the modesty of his mother's home. Christopher pursed his lips, evident displeasure on his face. Brian had barely graduated from university and was already showing signs of a lavish lifestyle. How can he afford this? Christopher murmured to himself as he watched Brian ring the doorbell. Dorothy opened the door with a smile, but even from a distance, Christopher could see it was forced. There was a brief conversation, and then the envelope changed hands. Brian gave a careless kiss on Dorothy's cheek and left without looking back. "This isn't right," Christopher spoke out loud, as if expecting someone to agree with him. He decided it was time to act. Setting his mug on the table, he donned his coat and crossed the street to Dorothy's house. The doorbell echoed for a moment before Dorothy opened the door, surprised to see her neighbor. "Chris, what a pleasant surprise," she said, her smile this time a bit more genuine. "What brings you here?" Christopher was not one to beat around the bush. "Dorothy, I need to talk to you about something important. May I come in?" She nodded, making room for him to enter. In the living room, Christopher looked around, noting how the house seemed quieter and sadder than usual. "Dorothy, I've noticed your children coming here more often," he began, hesitant about how to broach the subject. Dorothy sighed, sitting down in one of the floral armchairs. "Yes, they've been coming to help with finances and all that." "But are they really helping, Dorothy?" Christopher asked, sitting across from her. "Because every time they come, it seems they leave with more than they bring." Dorothy's expression hardened, a mix of defensiveness and vulnerability passing through her eyes. "Oh, Chris, you don't understand. They have their own expenses and—" "Dorothy, I know it's hard, but you need to see what's happening. Are you safe? Are they really taking care of you?" Dorothy averted her gaze, a tear forming. I don't know anymore, Chris. I try to believe so, but sometimes everything seems so confused." Christopher held her hand, offering a comforting squeeze. "I'm here, Dorothy. If you need anything, anything at all, I'm here." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Maybe it's time we look at these finances together. Let's make sure you're being treated fairly." Dorothy nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "Maybe you're right, Chris. I accept your help." With a plan in mind and an ally by her side, Dorothy felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they decided to review the accounting books the next day, preparing to face whatever they might find. That night, Christopher returned home, reflecting on all the years he had known Dorothy and her late husband. He knew the next day might reveal painful truths, but he was determined to help his friend, no matter the cost. As he prepared for the task, the first signs of a broader conspiracy began to emerge, leading directly into the next chapter of his intervention. The following morning brought a light mist that slowly dissipated under the gentle warmth of the sun. Christopher approached Dorothy's door with a folder full of documents and a look of determination. When she opened the door, there was a mix of anxiety and relief on her face. "Chris, good morning," Dorothy greeted, somewhat hesitantly, opening the door wider. "I was expecting you." "Thank you, Dorothy. I hope I'm not imposing," Christopher said as he entered, glancing around the familiar living room that seemed to hold every memory of the place in perfect order. "Not at all. I appreciate this." "Really," she replied, leading him to the kitchen where a pot of tea was already waiting for them. "I think a bit of tea will help us handle the numbers." As they sat down at the kitchen table, Dorothy poured the tea, her hands trembling slightly. Christopher opened his folder, revealing a series of charts and spreadsheets. "Dorothy, you mentioned yesterday that you don't see all the money that should be in the shop's till," Christopher began, his voice soft yet firm. "Can we start there? Can you show me the recent records?" Dorothy sighed deeply, standing to fetch a stack of papers from a nearby drawer. "Here they are," she said, handing them to Christopher. "Jessica handles most of this, but I try to keep track too." Christopher began to meticulously sift through the documents, occasionally making notes. "I see some discrepancies in the numbers here," he pointed out, marking a particular record. "These entries are significantly lower than the corresponding outputs." Dorothy took the sheet, trying to mask her concern. "Jessica always tells me those are operational expenses or delayed payments to suppliers. Do you verify these payments with the suppliers directly?" Christopher asked, watching her closely. I trust that Jessica is handling that," Dorothy admitted, avoiding his gaze. "I know I should check more closely, but—" It's hard when it's family, Christopher finished for her, understandingly. But it's important to know where every penny is going, especially in a small business. Yes, you're right, Dorothy agreed, nervously. What else can we do, Chris? Well, I think we should do a complete inventory of the products and a detailed review of all cash movements from the past few months. I can help with that, if you'd like, he suggested, already preparing a list of actions to be taken. Dorothy nodded, grateful. I would really appreciate that, Chris. I don't know how to thank you. No need to thank me, Dorothy. We'll take care of this together, said Christopher, offering an encouraging smile. They spent the next few hours immersed in numbers and records, building a clearer picture of the financial reality of the store. As the day unfolded, the truth began to reveal itself, layer by layer. It was evident there was more at play than mere oversight. Some of the cash outflows didn't correspond to any legitimate entries, and Jessica's excuses seemed increasingly flimsy. As daylight began to wane, Christopher and Dorothy prepared to face the full reality the next day. With a strategy in mind and a night to ponder their next actions, they knew they were about to trigger a series of events that could change everything. That night, Christopher could hardly sleep, pondering the implications of what they had discovered. He knew a confrontation with Jessica and the other children was inevitable. Prepared for what the next day would bring, he hoped that the truth would finally free Dorothy from her chains of doubt and uncertainty, initiating the next chapter of her journey to recovery. Michael held the phone, his grim expression reflecting his growing concern. On the other end of the line, Dorothy's voice, although trying to convey normalcy, was tremulous and hesitant, something Michael noticed immediately. "How are things, Mom? Is the business doing well?" asked Michael, probing deeper. "Oh, yes, dear, everything is going well," Dorothy responded, her voice faltering slightly at the end. Michael frowned, his instinct telling him that something was definitely not right. "Mom, you sound tired. Are you sure everything's okay?" Dorothy sighed, a pause long enough to convey more than words could. "It's just age, my son. And business can be so tiring sometimes." That hesitation was all Michael needed to make his decision. "Mom, I'm thinking about visiting soon. I think I need some time away from work here, and I miss you." Dorothy's response was mixed, palpable relief tinged with nervousness. "Oh, Michael, that would be wonderful, but you really don't need to bother." "It's decided, Mom. I'll look at flights and let you know when I'll be there," Michael interrupted, his voice firm and decisive. After hanging up, Michael sat back, his fingers drumming on the counter. He knew he needed a solid plan to understand what was really happening with his mother and the family business. Inspired by a flurry of quick thoughts, he grabbed his laptop and began to outline his plan. First, he decided not to notify his siblings of his exact arrival date. He wanted the chance to observe the dynamics of the house without the influence of his presence. He booked his flight and a rental car under a different name to avoid immediate recognition upon arrival. Additionally, Michael reached out to an old college friend who now worked as a financial auditor. "Hey, Tom, I need a big favor. Can you help me with a discreet audit? I have suspicions about the management of my mom's store finances." Tom, ever the loyal friend, agreed without hesitation. "Of course, Mike. Just give me the details and I'll arrange everything to be as discreet as possible." With the plan in motion, Michael felt more prepared. He knew the upcoming weeks would be crucial. He would have to deal with the possibility of confronting his own family, but also needed to be ready to support his mother, regardless of what he discovered. As he packed his bags, Michael's determination only strengthened. He was about to unravel the secrets that kept his mother chained to a potentially exploitative situation. Upon landing, Michael felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but also a spark of hope. As he drove toward his hometown, he braced for any confrontation that might occur, knowing that the next few hours would be crucial in defining his family's future. As the city began to appear on the horizon, Michael adjusted the rearview mirror and took a deep breath, ready for what was to come. The next chapter of his journey was about to begin, and he was determined to restore peace and security to his mother's life. Michael parked the rental car at a safe distance from the family home, where the curtains were still drawn despite the hour. The neighborhood looked the same as always, quiet and familiar, but to him, everything now carried a different weight. He adjusted his cap and sunglasses, an attempt not to be immediately recognized by any curious neighbors who might see him. From his position, he could clearly see the entrance to the house. His brothers, Jason and Brian, arrived together, laughing loudly at something on their phones. Their indifference was palpable even from a distance. They didn't notice Michael, too caught up in their own world. Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter, his fingers whitening with tension. He watched as his brothers rang the doorbell and waited. Dorothy opened the door, her tired smile barely masking her exhaustion. "Hello, Mom," Brian greeted, giving her an awkward kiss on the cheek while glancing over her shoulder as if looking for something inside the house. "We brought some stuff for you," he said, without enthusiasm. "Oh, yes, thank you, dears," Dorothy replied, trying to sound cheerful. "Do you want to come in and have some coffee?" Jason, glancing impatiently at his watch, quickly responded, We can't, Mom. We have an important meeting in an hour. Just came to drop off some stuff and pick up those documents you said you'd kept for us." Dorothy seemed to hesitate for a moment, then nodded, turning to fetch the documents. Michael watched every movement, anger growing inside him as the interaction unfolded. When Dorothy returned, she handed Jason an envelope that appeared to contain more than mere papers. Jason barely glanced inside, simply stuffing it quickly into his coat pocket. "Great, this should cover it. Thanks, Mom." Brian was already walking away, clearly disinterested. "See you, Mom. Oh, and try not to spend all that at once, okay?" He laughed, thinking he had made a joke. Dorothy forced a laugh, but Michael could see the sadness in her eyes. "Sure, dears. Take care," she said as they left. As soon as Jason and Brian's car drove away, Michael got out of his car and quickly crossed the street, his indignation nearly overwhelming him. He knocked on the door before Dorothy had the chance to fully close it. Dorothy opened the door again, surprised to see a man in a cap and sunglasses. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Then, he removed his glasses and cap, and her face lit up with recognition and shock. "Michael." "What? How? When did you get here?" she stammered, her words tripping over her surprise. "I just got here, Mom," Michael said, embracing her. "And I've already seen more than enough to know something isn't right here." Dorothy sighed, the dams of her resistance beginning to crumble. "Oh, Michael, I didn't want you to worry." "It's too late for that, Mom. Let's go inside and talk. We need to sort this out once and for all," he said, determined. Dorothy nodded, leading him inside. As she closed the door behind them, the silence between mother and son was dense, laden with unspoken words and truths about to be revealed. Michael knew the next step would be to confront his brothers, and he was ready to do whatever it took to protect Dorothy. The atmosphere in the Miller family living room was as heavy as lead when Michael called for an urgent family meeting. Dorothy, apprehensive, served coffee to everyone while Jessica, Jason, and Brian entered the room, each wearing an expression of confusion mixed with slight irritation at being summoned. Michael waited until everyone was settled. He looked at each of his siblings with a severity he rarely used. "Thank you for coming. We need to discuss some serious issues regarding the family business and Mom's well-being." Jessica crossed her arms, her face closing off in defiance. "What's going on, Michael? Why the drama?" "It's not drama, Jessica," Michael replied, his voice firm. "It's about the responsibility and respect we owe our mother. I saw what happened here yesterday. I saw you three come in, talk briefly with Mom, and leave with money. A lot of money." Jason shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. "Mike, we're just helping to manage things. Mom's old, she can't handle everything." "Managing? or taking advantage?" Michael interrupted, standing up to face Jason directly. "I've spoken to Tom, a financial auditor. He's going to review all the business books. If everything is as it should be, great. But if not..." Brian, who had been silent until then, let out a sarcastic laugh. "You really brought in an auditor? What a dramatic move, Michael." "Dramatic or not, it's necessary," Michael countered. "I won't stand by while our mother is exploited." Dorothy, sitting in a corner, stood up. "I don't want you to fight over me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Mom, we're not fighting," Michael responded, turning to calm her. "We're trying to ensure you're treated fairly and with respect." Jessica, who had remained relatively quiet, finally spoke, her voice laden with frustration. "Michael, you've been away for so long. You don't understand how things work here." "I understand enough," Michael said, staring intently at her. "I understand that things need to change." The discussion intensified, with accusations flying from both sides. Michael kept his composure, channeling all his energy to keep the focus on what was important, the safety and well-being of Dorothy. Finally, Brian stood up, clearly agitated. "So, what do you suggest, Michael? That we babysit our mother as if she's a child?" "No, Brian," Michael replied, his patience wearing thin. "I suggest we treat our mother with the respect and dignity she deserves. And that starts with transparency about finances." The meeting ended without a clear resolution, but with the promise of an impending audit. Each sibling left with turbulent thoughts about the implications of this audit for their own lives. Michael stayed with Dorothy, ensuring she knew he was there to support her, no matter what happened. They sat together, a contemplative silence filling the room after the storm. As night fell, Michael knew the coming weeks would bring even greater challenges. He was prepared to face each one, for his mother. The morning after the tumultuous family meeting dawned gray and gloomy, as if the very sky reflected the tensions within the Miller household. Dorothy was in the kitchen, preparing coffee, when Jessica arrived unexpectedly. Jessica's face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from lack of sleep. "Can I talk to you, Mom?" Jessica asked with a trembling voice, closing the kitchen door behind her. Dorothy nodded, apprehensive. "Of course, dear. What's going on?" Jessica sat down at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she gathered the courage to speak. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Something important and terrible." She paused, searching for the right words. Dorothy placed a hand over Jessica's, encouraging her to continue. "What is it, Jessie? You can tell me anything." Taking a deep breath, Jessica began her confession. "Mom, I've been diverting money from the store. Not just me, Jason and Brian are involved too. It started small, you know, but then it got out of control." Jessica's words fell like stones on Dorothy's heart, each heavier than the last. "Why, Jessie? Why would you do that?" Dorothy asked, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't know, Mom. I really don't. It seemed easy at first, and we needed the money. But then, it started to feel normal, and..." Jessica stopped, sobbing. "You needed the money for what?" "I always tried to provide everything you needed," Dorothy said, confusion and pain clear in her voice. "I know, Mom, I know. And I hate myself for it," Jessica cried, covering her face with her hands. "I just wanted more. Things that my friends had. Stupid things, really." And then, when Michael moved abroad, it seemed even easier to continue. No one was really watching, and... Dorothy stood up abruptly, pain transforming into indignation. "And you thought that was right? To abuse your own mother's trust?" Jessica also stood up, tears now flowing freely. "No, Mom, I never thought it was right. I just couldn't stop. And now I'm so miserable, Mom. I'm so miserable." Despite her heartbreak, Dorothy couldn't help but feel compassion for her daughter. She stepped forward and hugged Jessica. "Oh, Jessie, what are we going to do with you?" "I'll fix this, Mom. With or without Jason and Brian. I'll pay back every penny. I swear," Jessica promised, clinging to her mother as if she were a lifeline. "We'll fix this together," Dorothy affirmed, holding Jessica. "We'll get through this. But things are going to have to change. You understand that, don't you?" Jessica nodded, sobbing into her mother's shoulder. "Yes, Mom. I understand. And I'll do whatever it takes. I will." The two women remained embraced, finding a small comfort amid the storm. And as the kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, Dorothy knew the road ahead would be difficult but necessary. They would have to rebuild trust and the business, stone by stone. This moment of vulnerability and repentance set the stage for the next phase of their journey as they planned the arduous task of reconstruction and redemption. Jessica's confession was just the beginning. After Jessica's painful confession, the atmosphere in Dorothy's house was dense, charged with emotion and uncertainty about the future. As Dorothy tried to process the enormity of her children's betrayal, Christopher arrived for his weekly visit, immediately noticing the tension in the air. "Dorothy, are you okay?" he asked concernedly, finding her sitting alone on the porch, staring into space. Dorothy sighed deeply, forcing a smile upon seeing him. "Oh, Chris, it's good to see you. There's so much going on. I don't even know where to start." Christopher sat down beside her, offering a listening ear. "Talk to me, Dorothy. Maybe I can help in some way." With hesitation, Dorothy began to recount recent events, from discovering Jessica's actions to her daughter's distressing confession. "And now, I don't know what to do, Chris. I feel so betrayed." Christopher listened attentively, his face expressing a mix of anger and compassion. "Dorothy, this is incredibly hard, but you are strong. And you're not alone in this. Let's think of practical solutions to protect you and the business going forward." "But how? I can barely trust my own family now," Dorothy lamented, the sadness weighing heavily in her voice. Thoughtfully, Christopher suggested, "First, we could strengthen financial control. Perhaps introduce regular, independent audits. And what about appointing someone trustworthy, aside from your children, to co-sign any significant withdrawals?" Dorothy considered this for a moment. "That might work. Maybe I could even involve a lawyer to help restructure the financial protocols." "Exactly," Christopher agreed. "And regarding emotional support, have you thought about talking to a counselor? Sometimes, speaking with a professional can help process what happened and plan for the future more clearly." Dorothy nodded, the idea seeming to lift some of the weight from her shoulders. "Maybe I should, yes. And Chris, thank you. Having you here means a lot to me." "I'll always be here, Dorothy. You know that," Christopher replied, offering a comforting smile. They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing various strategies to strengthen Dorothy's financial and emotional defenses. Christopher helped draft a detailed plan, from finding a reputable lawyer to choosing a trustworthy counselor. By the end of the day, Dorothy felt a bit more hopeful, armed with an action plan and the unwavering support of a true friend. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but felt less isolated and vulnerable. As the sun began to set, coloring the sky in shades of orange and purple, Dorothy and Christopher walked through the garden together, solidifying their strategy. It was a moment of calm before the next phase of reconstruction and healing that was about to begin in the next chapter of her life. The sun had not yet fully set when Michael and Christopher gathered in Dorothy's spacious kitchen, now transformed into an improvised war room for the recovery of the Miller business. They spread financial documents, notes, and laptops across the oak table that Dorothy cherished. Michael started the meeting with a serious tone, reflecting the gravity of their mission. "Chris, we need a solid plan that not only regains control of the business but also protects my mother from further harm. She can't remain this vulnerable." Christopher, who had already sketched out some preliminary ideas, agreed, pulling out a list of topics to discuss. I completely agree, Michael. I thought we should start with a thorough review of all financial transactions. We need to identify all leakage points and effectively block them. That's crucial, Michael nodded, looking over the records. We also need to establish a new internal control system, perhaps introducing different levels of authorization for expenses and financial decisions. Christopher suggested, how about implementing financial management software? There are several on the market that can offer real-time transparency and control over finances. This would give your mother the visibility she needs without having to rely too much on others. Michael noted the suggestion. Excellent idea, Chris. Let's look at options and select the one that best fits the business needs. Additionally, we need to think about training for the staff, including my mother, so that everyone is aligned with the new processes. I'm also thinking about legal security, Christopher added, adjusting his glasses. It would be prudent to have a lawyer review all our new contracts and financial agreements. Moreover, a lawyer could help us recover any funds that were improperly diverted. I'll contact a trusted lawyer first thing tomorrow, Michael confirmed, feeling a surge of determination. And about the audit, do you think Tom would be available to start next week? I've already spoken with him, and he's ready. He understands the urgency of the situation and is willing to prioritize us, Christopher said, checking his notes. The two spent several hours outlining every aspect of the plan, from short-term measures to stabilize finances to long-term strategies for sustainable business growth. As the evening progressed, they established a timeline of actions, each with clear responsibilities. Chris, I don't know how to thank you for all your help, Michael expressed, extending his hand across the table in a gesture of gratitude. Michael, helping you and Dorothy is just natural for me. We're more than neighbors, we're friends, and that's what friends do, Christopher responded, shaking Michael's hand. With a robust plan in hand, both felt a renewed sense of hope. They knew the challenges were enormous, but now they were armed with a solid strategy and the commitment to see the business and Dorothy safe and prosperous. As they closed the session that night, Michael's mind was already focused on the next major challenge: implementing the plan and starting the healing process for the family and the business. Dawn would bring the beginning of that journey, marking a new chapter in the Miller family story. Jessica felt each step weigh heavily as she approached the house where she grew up. It was a crisp morning, and the sun was beginning to dissipate the dew from the previous night. The familiar path seemed strangely long and uncertain that day. With the decision to face the consequences of her actions, she paused for a moment before ringing the doorbell, taking a deep breath to gather courage. Dorothy opened the door, surprised to see her daughter so early. Jessica, what happened, dear? Are you all right? Mom, I need to talk to you, said Jessica, her voice choked with emotion. May I come in? Of course, my child, Dorothy replied, making room for her to pass. Together, they headed to the kitchen, where so many family conversations had taken place. Jessica sat at the kitchen table, avoiding her mother's gaze. Mom, I came here today because I am deeply sorry for what I did. I lied, I manipulated, and I caused so much damage. Dorothy sat across from her, her face marked by a mix of sadness and hope. Jessica, what really brings you here? Mom, I want to make things right. I want to help repair the damage I caused to the business and our family, Jessica continued, finally meeting her mother's eyes. I spoke with Michael, and he agreed to give me a chance to prove I can do the right thing. Dorothy observed her daughter for a moment, weighing her words. That's a start, Jessie, but it will take time to rebuild the trust that was broken. How do you plan to do that? Jessica swallowed hard, aware of the challenge ahead. I will work directly with Michael to review all accounts and transactions. I'll help implement the new financial management system that he and Christopher are setting up. And I will do whatever it takes to learn to be responsible, not just in the business but also as your daughter. That means a lot to me, Jessica, Dorothy said, her words heavy with emotion. "Seeing you take responsibility is an important step. I hope you understand the seriousness of this second chance."
"Ido, ma'am."
"And I won't waste it," Jessica promised, tears beginning to form in her eyes. The two embraced, a hug that sealed a cautious new beginning. It was a gesture of forgiveness and renewed hope, although Dorothy knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges. In the following days, Jessica worked diligently alongside Michael. She quickly learned the intricacies of the new financial management software, demonstrating a commitment that even surprised her brother. Michael watched, cautiously optimistic about his sister's change in attitude. "I think you're really making an effort, Jess," Michael admitted one afternoon, as they reviewed some financial reports.
"I'm impressed."
"I want to get this right, Michael," Jessica responded earnestly. "Not just for Mom, but for myself too." As Jessica began to make real and visible repairs, the family slowly started to heal the wounds of the past. But as Jessica, Michael, and Dorothy worked to strengthen the business and their family ties, other family members still had to face their own realities and the consequences of their actions. The next chapter promised to be challenging, as Jason and Brian confronted the changes and the new reality of responsibility and integrity now shaping the Miller family. On a cloudy afternoon, Jason and Brian found themselves driving back to their mother's house, an uncomfortable silence hanging in the car. Both had spent the morning reflecting on the harsh but true words Michael had spoken to them. The reality of their actions and the consequences of those acts were beginning to deeply settle in their consciences. Brian broke the silence first. "Do you think she'll forgive us?" he asked, looking out the window, avoiding his brother's gaze. Jason sighed, a sound heavy and laden with remorse. "I don't know, man. We really messed up. It's not just about the money, it's about trust, respect." "I know," murmured Brian, his voice low. "I can't even believe how we let things get to this point." When they arrived, they found Dorothy in the kitchen, preparing afternoon tea, an attempt to maintain some normality amidst the recent chaos. She looked surprised as her two sons entered, the tension visible on their faces. "Mom," Jason started, taking the lead while Brian hung back a step, we've come to apologize for everything." Dorothy put the kettle on the stove and turned to face them, her eyes searching for sincerity in theirs. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" she asked, wanting to hear the words, needing to understand if they truly grasped the gravity of their actions. Brian stepped forward, swallowing hard. "For taking advantage of you, for thinking only of ourselves, for not being the sons you deserve." Jason added, "We've started to see how our actions affected not just the business, but you, personally. Not just financially, but emotionally too. And that hurt us more than we expected." Dorothy listened, the words of her sons penetrating the wall she had built around her heart. She saw the pain in their eyes, the hesitation in their voices. "Does this mean you're ready to change? To really be part of this family as you should be?" "Yes, Mom," they both replied, almost in unison. "Then let's start anew," said Dorothy, allowing herself to feel a spark of hope. "Let's rebuild, together. But understand, this is going to require work, honesty, and time." Brian and Jason nodded, relieved by the opportunity for redemption, but aware of the long road ahead. In the days that followed, both worked side by side with Michael and Jessica, learning the new financial systems, participating in meetings to establish transparent procedures, and most importantly, rebuilding their relationship with their mother and each other. The transformation in Jason and Brian did not go unnoticed. Dorothy saw how they began to take their responsibilities seriously, saw how they started to value family in a way they never had before. As the Miller family worked to heal the wounds of the past and strengthen the business for the future, they began to come together again as a family unit. Together, they faced challenges, ready for the next chapter of their lives, which promised new beginnings and the hope of a restored legacy. The first lights of the morning illuminated the Miller store, where the family gathered for another day of work. The air was fresh and carried a subtle aroma of hope and freshly brewed coffee. The change in the atmosphere was palpable. Each family member had a new sparkle in their eyes, a mix of determination and optimism. Dorothy, already at the counter, organized the merchandise while watching her children work together. Jessica and Michael discussed the best way to display a new product, while Jason and Brian reorganized the stock. The sound of their laughter and collaborative conversations was music to Dorothy's ears, who had not felt the atmosphere so light and productive for a long time. "Look at that, it seems like we are finally acting like a real team," Dorothy commented, approaching Michael and Jessica with a smile. Michael looked around, nodding with satisfaction. "It's true, Mom. And to think we got to this point. I really didn't expect things to change so quickly." Jessica, who was labeling some products, stopped and looked at Dorothy. "Mom, I just want to say that I'm happy to be here, being part of this. Thank you for giving me another chance." Dorothy placed her hand on Jessica's shoulder. "We all make mistakes, dear. The important thing is we learn from those mistakes. I'm proud of you and your brothers." Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Jason passed a box to Brian. "You know, Brian, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm enjoying working here with you." Brian, taking the box, laughed. "Me too, man. It feels like we're finally doing something worthwhile, doesn't it?" "Exactly. And helping Mom and making up for what we did." "It means a lot," Jason replied, his tone more serious than usual. As the day progressed, the family worked together, each completed task bringing a new level of restoration not just to the business, but to the family bonds themselves. Dorothy, watching everything from her counter, felt a mix of relief and gratitude. In the afternoon, during a lunch break, Dorothy joined her children at the kitchen table in the back of the store. "I want you all to know how grateful I am," she began, looking at each of them. "Seeing you work together, supporting each other, it heals an old heart like mine." "We're in this together, Mom," said Michael, taking her hand. "And we'll make sure the business thrives, not just for us, but for you and Dad's legacy." The conversation continued, friendly and full of future plans. There was an energy of renewal and commitment, a collective promise that things would continue to improve. As the store closed and twilight fell, the Miller family left the establishment not just as co-workers, but as a rejuvenated family, ready to face any challenges that might come. Dorothy knew there was still much work ahead, but with her children by her side, she felt ready for anything. As the lights of the store went out, a new phase was about to begin, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities. The journey of reconstruction would continue, each step strengthening the bonds that were once undone. The next chapter promised not just growth for the business, but also for each member of the Miller family as they explored new paths and possibilities. With harmony restored and the business stabilized, Dorothy began to contemplate the future with renewed vigor. During a quiet morning at the store, as she rearranged some shelves, she shared her thoughts with Michael and Christopher, who had come to help with some repairs and improvements. "You know, with everything stabilizing, I was thinking that maybe it's time to expand," Dorothy began, her eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and nervousness. "There's so much potential we haven't yet explored." Michael, who was adjusting a display, stopped to listen to his mother. "Expand? In what way, Mom?" "I was thinking about diversifying the products we offer. Maybe introduce a section for organic and local products. And perhaps even start a small cafe right here," explained Dorothy, gesturing around the store to illustrate her vision. Christopher, examining a counter that needed repair, looked at Dorothy with admiration. "That sounds fantastic, Dorothy. A cafe would add a great flow of customers throughout the day. And organic products are a growing trend. I think you're on the right track." "Really, Mom, this idea of a cafe seems brilliant," said Michael, now fully engaged in the conversation. "We could design a small, cozy space. People love the idea of shopping and having a coffee in the same place." Dorothy smiled, encouraged by their enthusiasm. "I also thought it could become a new meeting point for the community. A place not just to shop, but to connect. With the plan in mind, they spent the rest of the morning discussing details. Michael sketched ideas for remodeling the space, while Christopher offered suggestions on the best suppliers for quality organic products and coffee. We'll need to make a solid business plan and perhaps seek some external funding for the expansion, Michael pointed out, already considering the financial aspects. I can help with that, offered Christopher. I have some contacts who might be interested in investing in a sustainable local business like yours. Encouraged by the experience and support of her friends and family, Dorothy felt a wave of energy and optimism. It looks like we have a lot of work ahead, but I'm more excited than ever, she said with a smile. In the following days, the family and Christopher worked together on drafting the expansion plan. Dorothy busied herself with the design of the new cafe space, while Michael and Christopher focused on financial viability and contacting suppliers. The store began to transform slowly, each day bringing new progress and the promise of new beginnings. Dorothy's enthusiasm was contagious, spreading throughout the team and the community that was beginning to hear about the new developments. As the cafe project took shape, anticipation grew. Dorothy, revitalized and full of hope, knew she was embarking on an exciting new journey that would rejuvenate not just the business, but the entire community around her. As the chapter of recovery closed, a new chapter of growth and expansion was about to begin, promising not only to invigorate the business but also to reaffirm the Miller family's legacy as a pillar of the local community. As the days lengthened and spring flowers began to bloom, the new cafe inside the Miller store finally opened its doors. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the sweet smell of freshly baked cakes filled the air, attracting curious customers and regulars eager to see the transformation. Dorothy stood behind the counter, serving a cappuccino with a radiant smile. Michael, at her side, discussed with a local supplier about delivering organic ingredients for the artisan sandwiches they planned to introduce to the menu. Jessica and Brian, now more involved than ever, helped organize a small opening event planned for the weekend. "Can you believe this, Mom?" Jessica exclaimed, placing a new specials of the day sign on the counter. "It feels like just yesterday we were only planning all this." Dorothy looked around, her eyes sparkling with a mix of pride and excitement. "I knew we could create something wonderful, but this has exceeded all my expectations," she replied, watching an elderly couple choosing a spot near the window. The conversation between mother and daughter was interrupted by Brian, who approached with a list in hand. "Mom, look how many reservations we already have for the event. It's going to be a total success." Dorothy laughed, taking the list. "Oh, Brian, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you two are here with me, really being part of this." Meanwhile, Michael finalized details with the supplier and joined the conversation. "And to think that a year ago we were trying to figure out how to keep the store running. Now, we're expanding and really making a difference in the community." "That's true," agreed Dorothy. "And it's all thanks to the joint effort. Each one of you brought something unique to this project." The morning passed quickly with a constant stream of customers. The positive energy was palpable, each laugh and conversation in the corners of the cafe adding to the sense of community and renewal that Dorothy had always wished for the business. In the afternoon, as they prepared the store for closing, Christopher stopped by to see how things were going. "Dorothy, this is incredible," he said, looking around in admiration. "You and your children have really transformed this place." "Thank you, Chris," Dorothy responded, offering him a cup of her new coffee blend. "We couldn't have done it without your support and guidance." "I just gave a little push," Christopher said modestly. "You did the heavy lifting." As the day came to an end, Dorothy allowed herself a moment of reflection. The business was not only flourishing, but her relationship with her children was stronger than ever. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but with the family united and the business thriving, she felt that anything was possible. This new phase of success and family unity set the stage for the next chapter, promising even more growth and opportunities. As the Millers prepared for the big opening event, it was evident that the future was full of promise and potential. The transformation of the business was a symbol of what the family could achieve together, marking a new chapter of hope and prosperity. As the afternoon gave way to twilight, inviting aromas wafted from the kitchen where Dorothy moved with serene joy. The house was impeccably tidy, the lights softly illuminated to create a warm atmosphere, perfect for the special family dinner she had planned. It was a celebration not just of the business's successes, but of the unity and recovery of her family. Dorothy placed the final dishes on the large dining table, where porcelain plates and silverware were arranged with precision. The evening's menu included each family member's favorite dishes, prepared with the care only a mother could dedicate. As the family began to gather, the sounds of conversations and laughter filled the space. Jessica arrived first, followed closely by Brian and Jason, each bringing a small gift for Dorothy as a sign of their appreciation and repentance. Michael entered with Christopher, each carrying a bottle of fine wine to complement the meal. "Mom, everything looks wonderful," Michael praised, as he placed his gift, a bouquet of fresh flowers, at the center of the table. Dorothy smiled, embracing each of her children and Christopher. "I'm so glad you all could come. Tonight is about celebrating our family and the journey we've taken together." As everyone took their seats, Dorothy stood up, clearing her throat to draw attention. "I wanted to start this meal with a few thoughts," she began, looking around the table, her gaze touching each beloved face. "This past year has undoubtedly been the most challenging for us, but it was also the most revealing." She paused, holding back tears of emotion. "Each of you has shown a strength and growth that fill me with pride. Michael, your leadership and resolve brought our family back from the brink. Jessica, Brian, Jason, your desire for redemption and the courage to face your mistakes have strengthened the bonds that hold us together." Turning to Christopher, she continued, "And Chris, without your wisdom and unwavering support, I'm not sure we would have made it. You are more than a friend to us. You are part of this family." Everyone at the table raised their glasses, a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude. The conversation that followed was filled with memories, plans for the future, and plenty of laughter. It was an evening that truly reflected the beauty of forgiveness and the depth of familial love. As the night progressed, Dorothy reflected on the importance of keeping the family together, no matter the challenges. She knew the road ahead would still have its obstacles, but now she was certain that together, they could face anything. As the family said their goodbyes, promises of frequent visits and regular gatherings were made. Dorothy stood at the door, watching her children leave, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. With the house finally quiet, she walked to the living room, where the portrait of her late husband hung on the wall. "We made it," she whispered, a smile touching her lips as a solitary tear rolled down her cheek. "We really made it." In that moment, Dorothy knew that her family's legacy would continue, not just through the business they had built, but through the unwavering love that now bound them. Renewal was complete, and the future promised new beginnings and endless possibilities. With this realization, she allowed herself to rest, finally ready for whatever tomorrow would bring.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.